Hello everyone, my name is Tin, and welcome to everyone who is watching this video, which is essentially my lecture, my insights on delivering oral adjudications that I have agreed to record for the St. Andrews Pre-UDC tournament. I'm going to try to share my experiences, my thoughts, my tips and tricks for delivering oral adjudications, which I hope will be helpful to everyone watching. I will immediately preface this by saying that my tips might not work for everyone, simply because as it is with speeches and speaking styles, everyone has their own style of judging. And I encourage everyone to reach out to other judges whose OAs you have listened to in the past, who you think are good at delivering OAs, for their tips and tricks and insights as well. But I'm going to share things that have worked for me, and I hope that those are going to be quite useful to anyone who seeks guidance in improving in their OAs from this video. The thing I want to start with, actually, is by saying the following. I'm sure that everyone who has watched this video, or most people who are watching this video, have heard of the exercise, have been given the advice to do the exercise of taking a motion, doing 15 minutes prep time, delivering a Prime Minister's speech at home, then, recording that speech, listening to it, etc., etc. And you probably have heard of many debaters who have done this in preparation for majors, like they take one motion a day, they do one Prime Minister's speech a day, etc. It might be weird that I'm talking about Prime Minister speeches in a video that is supposed to be about giving oral adjudications. So I want to explain why I'm talking about Prime Minister speeches and why I'm mentioning this particular exercise. The first reason why I'm mentioning Prime Minister speeches is because, just like Prime Minister speeches, giving oral adjudications comes with practice. Intuitions that you have, which help you come up with the correct call and then deliver the explanation of that call, improve over time. Experience is key as you learn to overcome the difficulties you might have in delivering oral adjudications. Of course, some people are better at some skills naturally than others in terms of having different talent sets, but everyone can learn to give a good oral adjudication. It can be learned, it can be practiced, even if it takes time. So even if you're struggling right now, and you feel like you're not improving, this is not a reason to give up, because everyone can improve with experience and with time. The corollary of what I just said is that it can be practiced, not only at tournaments, but also at home. Similarly to the exercise I mentioned for Prime Minister speeches, where you can just go on to, debatemotions.io, pick out a motion, do prep time, deliver the speech, listen to your own speech, have others listen to it. You can do the same for oral adjudications. You can watch a recorded debate, judge it, come up with a call, deliver an OA, record that OA, listen to it, think about what you might have done wrong. There are also even some tournaments that have recorded oral adjudications where you can compare what you've done in your OA to what top-level judges have done in theirs. The first example that pops to mind is the European Round Robin of 2019, which recorded OAs. I know there is also a video from Madrid WDC at the showcase debate of the oral adjudication. But in any case, you can do the same practice you do with Prime Minister speeches with oral adjudications. So it's possible to practice this outside of tournaments, which is a very good thing in terms of time efficiency, because you don't have to necessarily spend an entire weekend judging in order to practice your OAs. But the third and most important thing, and I think you might see where I'm getting at already with this, is that oral adjudications are incredibly similar to Prime Minister speeches. In fact, I would consider OAs to essentially be Prime Minister speeches on the motion, this House believes that my call is the correct call, or this House believes that the panel's call is the correct call. You're trying to convince speakers of the veracity of the claim that the call that you have reached as a panel is correct. The implication of this is that we can draw many insights as to how a good OA should look and be prepared from Prime Minister speeches and debating speeches in general. The first crucial implication here, and again, I'm going to make the analogy with Prime Minister speeches. There is no good Prime Minister speech without good preparation, because delivery only gets you so far, right? So you can have good style, you can have a strong vocabulary, but you're not going to have a good Prime Minister speech if you don't have good arguments, if you don't have a good prep time with your partner, if you don't have good structure, if you don't have well-written and legible notes that you can find your way through, which means that having a good Prime Minister speech starts well before the actual Prime Minister speech. And very analogously, having an effective OA, delivering an effective OA, starts well before you actually call the speakers back into the room and begin delivering the OA. Having a good OA and delivering an effective OA starts with tracking the round well. So I want to share a couple of pieces of advice with regards to tracking. The first important thing is that you need to find a balance between listening and writing. On the one hand, it's important to have the crucial pieces of framing, the crucial mechanisms, and the crucial impacts written down. But on the other hand, if you over-focus on writing, if you try to catch every word that speakers are saying, especially in the current meta where speakers tend to speak very fast, I myself have been guilty of this a number of times, it's going to be very hard for you to think about what the speakers are saying while they are saying it. And it is crucial that you think and contemplate about the content you hear as you are hearing it. Because your process of adjudication, your process of coming up with the call, your process of understanding the comparison and relations between the round starts during the round and should start during the round, because if your adjudication process begins during the round, this facilitates your panel discussion, and ultimately you begin to generate comparisons, you begin to generate reasons and explanations that are going to ultimately feature in your oral adjudication. So it's important to find a balance between listening and writing. I'm going to repeat a quote which my partner, whom I won worlds with, Lovro, liked to say, and this is that writing is a deeply unintellectual activity. The more you write, the less you think. Now, how do you find this balance? Now, speakers themselves are going to give you cues as to what's important. Speakers literally in their speeches highlight when something is crucial, either by changing their tone of voice or by literally telling you that something is crucial. So listen to cues in speeches in order to facilitate this process of finding a balance. And of course, finding a balance is also something that comes with time and practice. You're going to have to try out different amounts of focusing on listening and focusing on writing to find what works best for you. But it's incredibly important to find that balance, because you need to begin to generate an idea of how the final call is going to pan out, or at least what you think the initial call is, already during the round, because it speeds up the panel discussion and makes it significantly easier. That's important because your panel discussion is essentially your prep time for your OA, which I'm going to talk more about later. The second important thing is that you need to have an idea of what the gist of each team's case is, that you're able to summarize each team's case in 3 or 4 sentences. This is important because oral adjudications are going to require you to summarize cases. You're not going to have the time to go through every mechanism, through every example, through every impact. You're going to need to summarize cases and do it in such a way that teams feel that you actually correctly represented what their case was. So you need to be able to catalyze everything into a relatively small amount of time and of content, but still in such a way that teams feel that you've recognized all the content that they've provided. One of the tricks that I've seen help a lot of people, it's not one I use myself, but I know that many people do, so I'm going to suggest it, is beside your debate notes, keeping a separate paper where you have, like, you divide it into 4 squares, and you have just like 3 or 4 sub-points for each of the 4 teams, just shortly summarizing what you think their burden of proof is, which path to victory they're taking, what their framing is, and the headlines of their arguments, just so you have an idea of what each team's case is once you're entering the panel discussion. Another thing which is very useful, and I do this especially for closing teams, but for all teams in general when doing a panel discussion, before moving into comparisons, make sure that you are all on the same page in terms of what a team's case is. So start with summaries. Ask someone on the panel to provide a summary of, say, OG's case. Ask the rest of the panel if they have anything to add. If you have anything to add, or if you disagree with something, mention that. Only once you have a general consensus on what the cases are for all of the teams, should you proceed to comparisons. The third thing I think is very helpful in terms of facilitating your adjudication process during the round itself is to be making comments in your notes. Don't just write down what speakers are saying, but also note beside that whether you think something is a burden push, something is a tension, something is a crucial piece of weighing, something is a particularly important POI. So what I do is, when I'm always writing on paper, I don't judge on my computer, I write content, actual content, so things teams have said, using a blue or black pen, and I write my comments in red pen beside that. So I have my thoughts in my notes when I'm looking over them during the panel discussion. But also writing your thoughts down helps you retain those thoughts and helps you have a coherent conception of what actually had happened in the round, and helps you track how different cases engage with each other. So I think that's quite crucial. So the summary of this bit is just to say, keep in mind that you already need to start adjudicating as you're listening to the round. You cannot be a passive listener, because that is going to make it far harder for you in deliberation, and then as a corollary, far harder for you when delivering your oral adjudication. Now, let's move on to the deliberation itself. And here again, I'm going to draw an analogy with prime minister speeches, or in general debate speeches, if you will. Your delib is essentially your prep time. Even the disagreements that can happen on a panel are analogous to prep time, because sometimes you're going to disagree with your partner and you're going to have to find a consensus as to which case to run within a very limited amount of time and under a lot of pressure. So understand deliberation as your prep time for delivering the OA. During deliberation, similarly to actual prep time for actual speeches, you need to maintain maximum focus so that you can both listen, speak, and write. This is the same thing you are doing when you are preparing a prime minister speech. You cannot just be discussing with your partner. You need to be writing things down. If you are only discussing with the panel and not preparing notes for your oral adjudication, you're going to have a worse OA. So to make it very clear, do not deliver your OA from your debate notes, because your debate notes contain everything that you've written down in terms of what was said in the debate. Some of those things are more important, some of them are less important, some of them should be mentioned in the OA, and some of them shouldn't. If you are trying to deliver an OA from your debate notes, you will simultaneously be delivering the OA and trying to catalyze the content from your debate notes into an actual viable summary or delivery, or however you want to call it, that cannot take more than 15 minutes. So in the same way in which for any debate speech you have your notes for that particular speech, you should be having a sheet of notes for your OA, a separate sheet. So not your debate notes, but a separate sheet of paper where you will be writing down your OA and the structure of your OA. It should be written in the way in which you want your OA to be structured. So the paper, or if you're judging from a laptop, the computer document you're giving your OA from, should be dedicated specifically to your OA and should be the outline, should be the structure of your oral adjudication. Your debate notes are there to facilitate the creation of that final paper or final document, but should not be the thing you are delivering your OA from. Now, the question is, how do you structure it? For me, personally, deliberation and consequentially the notes I'm writing on my paper make the most sense if they are done chronologically. So just go through the round in chronological order. Because then you just firstly do OG versus OO as you would in any 3 versus 3 format, like which of these two top half teams beat the other. Then you introduce closing government. How does CG compare to OG? How do they compare to OO? Then you introduce CO. How do they compare to CG, to OG, to OO? That is the most linear, most sensible structure you can have. And that is also the easiest structure to have written down and follow on a paper or in a document that you're writing. It's the structure that, at least for me, best guarantees you're not going to be jumping around from team to team, losing structure in your OA, etc. This should then also be reflected in the OA, at least in my perspective. Chronological OAs, I think, are the most structured OAs and the most sensible OAs. I know some people like to go from first to fourth. Some people have different conceptions of how to give OAs. All that is fine. My personal advice would be go chronologically because it produces the best structure. Make sure, both in the deliberation and in the OA, that you discuss all pairwise comparisons. Because in BP debating, teams should be able to beat other teams. They should, if they win against another team, it should be because they have independently defeated that team. Judging by transitivity is bad judging, is lazy judging, and is ultimately going to give you worse feedback. So make sure, at least shortly, to analyze all pairwise comparisons in your deliberation, because it would be good for you to at least shortly refer to all pairwise comparisons in the oral adjudication, because that makes for a more persuasive oral adjudication. Of course, that some comparisons, both in DLib and the actual OA, are going to take more time to discuss in the DLib or explain in the OA than others, but all should be mentioned. Do not judge by transitivity, and do not skip relations. All relations must be mentioned in order for you to have a comprehensive oral adjudication. Now we come to the essential part of what this lecture is about, and that is delivering an OA. Delivering an OA, essentially, and we're still following, tracking the same analogy here. Delivering an OA is pretty much the same as delivering a debate speech. The only benefit is that you have more time. You don't have 7 minutes, you have 15 or even 20 or 25 if Orcom is feeling particularly nice or the schedule is not particularly tight. But essentially, the speakers are analogous to the panel that you have to convince when you are a debater. And essentially, you are trying to do the same thing as you are when you are debating, which is trying to convince someone that what you're saying is true and not false and not stupid. This means that all of the same tricks that you use in debating apply to giving an OA. And a lot of the advice you've heard in feedback from judges in terms of how to improve your debating are also tips and tricks that you can utilize in order to improve your OAs. I have a list of, say, 7 broad pieces of advice that I think cross-apply to both speeches and OAs and can help you give a better oral adjudication. The first thing is, and this is something you hear very often in speeches and in feedback, you should be doing even-if analysis. What do I mean by this? There can be, and in most good rooms there will be reasons why teams lose to other teams, even if they were actually able to prove parts of their case. The better the debate, the more likely it is that some teams, or even all teams, are going to prove something in their cases. However, some teams are still going to beat other teams. This means that there are reasons why, even if a team has proven something, another team has still defeated them. In other words, in good rooms, wins are very rarely total and complete victories. They are nuanced. The reason why it's important to do even-if analysis explicitly in your OAs, to say, okay, we think OO proved this part of their case, but here is why we think it still loses to OG, is because then you are recognizing the extent of proof and the extent of analysis provided by a team, and you are explaining why, despite that analysis, they still lose the debate. So you are comprehensively engaging with their case instead of just labeling it as lacking analysis or not being explained enough. You acknowledge what was proven and you explain the gap that still caused them to lose, which then makes for a more comprehensive oral adjudication. The second thing which is important is to explain which things and why mattered more than others. And this is analogous to metrics in a debate. There will be some clashes that are more important than other clashes. And the problem with OAs is that you cannot go through all of the clashes and all of the pieces of content in detail. You need to make a choice in terms of which things you're going to talk about more and which things you're going to talk about less when it comes to clashes between teams. It's important to explain to teams why some things were mentioned less. Maybe you talked less about a certain clash because a team had an internal tension that made their claim self-defeating, so there was not much of a clash in the first place, or teams implicitly agreed with each other, or the reasons of derivativeness or contingency on top half, doesn't matter, but you need to explain to teams why you thought certain things mattered less than other things. That's important because that's a way in which you make sure that teams actually feel heard. If you skip over content, or if you gloss over content without telling teams why you did that, that is a very good way to get teams angry at you, because they're going to be like, but we said this and the judge didn't mention it, the judge didn't talk about it at all. So it's incredibly important to explain your hierarchy of priorities and why some things mattered more to you in terms of the outcome of the debate than other things did. The third piece of advice I would give here is don't summarize. Rather, explain how different pieces of content interact with each other. What judges very often do, and that's a bad way of delivering in a way, and this is similar to when reply speakers, for example, do it in world schools, is they say, Team A said this, and then Team B said that, and I found this more persuasive. Why did you find that more persuasive? How do you explain what you found more persuasive? By explaining the interaction between different pieces of content. So did point X rebut point Y? Did it flip it completely? What were the burdens of both teams and how did their arguments interact with their burdens? When this team asked the POI, which hole did it expose in the other team's case? So each claim does something to another claim in the debate. A good piece of framing will outframe something from the other side. A good piece of rebuttal will take down or flip something from the other side. A well-proven argument is going to implicitly disprove underlying premises from the other side, because if there are two competing arguments, then necessarily some of their assumptions cannot be simultaneously true. So this is what you need to be explaining. What different pieces of content did to each other in the round? How did they interact? Instead of retelling the debate and then just saying, but this analysis was more persuasive. And if you're struggling with time management, cut down on the retelling and push more on the explanation of interactions between different pieces of content. Fourth, and this is crucial, especially in the light of, not least in the light of the recent changes made to the manual, which were published and then clarified by the UDCCA team, but in general, before every major tournament, we have changes made to the manual, we have updates made to the manual. You need to familiarize yourself with the manual. Read the manual, know the manual well, and refer to the manual when you are judging. Explain to the teams their burdens that they had that were implied by the motion. There are different burdens if the motion is this house regrets, this house opposes, this house believes that, or this house would. There are different burdens based on whether the motion contains quantifiers, right? Whether the motion says always, or in the majority of cases, or never, etc. The wording of the motion implies burdens. It is important, and it helps your oral adjudication to clearly outline what you think the burdens are for teams in the round based on how the motion is worded, because then throughout your oral adjudication, you can link back to those burdens and explain, okay, here's how you as a team did prove that burden and how you as a team did not prove that burden. But also knowing the manual and being familiar with it just helps you be a better judge in terms of coming up with the correct call, because it ensures you will be judging by the newest and most updated rules. So even if it doesn't help your OA, it's definitely going to help your judging and your ability to reach a correct call, which is crucial whether you are a chair, a panelist, or a trainee. Contributing the correct opinion about the debate is always better than contributing the wrong opinion about the debate. The fifth thing I want to say is it's very important to exemplify your claims. So when you are making a claim about a particular interaction in the round, refer to specific bits of content and the specific things specific speakers said in order to prove that what you're saying is true, similarly to how in a debate speech you would obviously be providing real-life examples or providing some kind of analogy to underpin your theoretical analysis. The same thing needs to happen here. So for example, when you are explaining why CG lost to OG, and then you say the reason why we ranked CG below OG, you summarize the CG case and you say, unfortunately, most of this was already in opening government, or it was contingent on opening government. Maybe the teams are already aware of this. That doesn't absolve you of the responsibility to still explain why and how you reach that conclusion. So if you're saying this was already in OG, what exactly did OG say? Why was whatever OG said sufficient for you to conclude that the overall contribution coming from the closing government team was not enough for them to overcome their opening. So refer to particular pieces of content and explain why those pieces of content were sufficient to convince you of a particular claim on a particular relation. So that one team was derivative of another, that one team had an internal tension, that one team was able to flip the content of another team, whatever it is that you are concluding about a team or a relation between teams. The sixth thing to say is try to be as assertive as possible. And this is kind of a fake it till you make it piece of advice. But I think being inconfident in oral adjudications leads to worse oral adjudications. Which is to say, if you sound unconfident in what you are saying, teams pick up on that. Teams begin to be suspicious of what you are saying. Teams begin to give you weird looks. Teams begin to, partners look at each other and they're like, I'm not really buying what the judge is saying. And then it gets to you, and then you begin stuttering. Then you begin losing your structure, then you begin losing your confidence. So in the same way in which it's crucial in a debate speech to keep your calm, be cool and collected, and stay assertive, it is also extremely important to do that for oral adjudications, because it's going to help you deliver a better OA. Try to ignore teams' reactions as much as possible. Try not to let those reactions get to you, and try, even if in the worst case you are not fully confident of what you're going to say in the OA, or not fully confident you'll deliver it well, try to be as confident, as calm, as assertive as possible. For some people, a trick that helps, and I sometimes do this as well, is to take the podium, right? Because most of us are accustomed to giving debate speeches, and this is something that's familiar to us, a familiar environment. So take the podium and refer to the teams, talk to the teams from the speaking podium, as if you were delivering a speech. This can be a psychological trick which helps you to kind of calm down before delivering your OA and during delivering your OA. The last thing I want to say is, I think this is relatively obvious, but it has to be said. Keep track of time. So in the same way in which you time your speech with like a stopwatch or a mobile phone, do the same thing for your OA. Because ideally you want to fit it in 15 minutes. Realistically, at most tournaments, you will get more than 15 minutes for your OA, simply because of all of the downtime that happens between rounds, while the CA team is, doing the draw, or Com is doing their stuff. There are also breaks between rounds which are budgeted into the schedule. So realistically, you will be able to go overtime. This doesn't mean you should go overtime. So you should be practicing such that your OAs fit into 15 minutes. So keep track of time. And if you see that you are likely going to go overtime, you will need to cut unnecessary bits on the fly. Try to decide on the fly, think about actively on the fly what you will cut from the OA if you feel that you are going overtime. There might be something you wanted to mention as, auxiliary claim, like the fourth additional reason why OG beats OO. Maybe that's something you want to cut. Similarly to how in a prime minister speech, if you see that you're losing time, you're gonna cut, your fourth mechanism on the fly because the first three are enough, so you can move on to something more important. But keep in mind that you are going to sometimes have to cut things you intended to say, and you're going to have to do this as you're delivering the OA. So that's something you need to keep in mind going into the OA, so that you are prepared to do that once that moment arises, when you look at your stopwatch and you see that your OA is potentially going to go overtime. The last two things I want to talk about are two tips I would have in order for you to practice, in order for you to improve. The first thing is that you should use every opportunity to watch and pay attention to good judges who you are judging with or who you are being judged by, to watch their OAs, to see their structure, their style of delivering an OA, how they explain things. If you're trying to improve as a judge, in particular as a chair giving an OA, and if you're watching this video to improve at it, I assume most of the people who will be watching this video are also, sometimes going to be panelists, are also going to sometimes debate at tournaments, where they will be judged obviously by chairs and they will receive OAs. So if your goal is to improve as a chair who wants to give an OA, listen carefully, not only to the content of the OA that's going on, but also to the way in which the OA is presented. And take notes on that. So if you're on the panel and your chair is giving the OA, don't be a passive listener. Take notes of their OA structure, their OA style. Even if you're a speaker, right? And many speakers do take notes while they're getting the OA in terms of reasons why they lost, why they could have improved. But if you are particularly pursuing the goal of improving as a chair in delivering OAs, then also take notes on the OA you're receiving in and of itself. So how is it structured? How did the judge manage time? How did they explain? What kind of formulations, what kind of style of explaining they used when they were explaining relations? So learn from other judges and don't waste those opportunities if you get those opportunities. The second thing, and this is kind of, how to say, tracking back to the analogy I gave at the beginning. I've already said that you can practice OAs at home by finding a recorded debate on the internet, then judging it and delivering an OA. But you can also record your own OAs at tournaments, and then you can listen to those OAs later, which means that you can take your OAs from a particular tournament where you were chairing. You can give yourself constructive criticism, analyze perhaps maybe where you lost time, where you digressed, where you were unstructured. But this also provides you with a crucial opportunity to ask other people for feedback. You can send this to other debaters, other judges whom you trust, whom you think can give you constructive advice, and you can ask them, oh wait, okay, do you think this was a good oral adjudication? Of course, in most instances, they will not have heard the debate, but they can give you advice on your structure, they can give you advice on your time management, they can give you advice in terms of the ways and the level of detail in which you explain particular relations. So recording your OAs is something that can really help, not only for you to analyze what you're doing, but for you to use the opportunity that you have to ask other people to also give you help and to also give you advice and to also give you feedback. That would generally be it for me for this talk. I think a summary of everything I've said would essentially be: you can treat an OA just as you would a debate speech. Most tricks, most tips of feedback that you've gotten from judges as to how to improve your debating also apply to your OAs. And crucially, keep practicing. And I think this is true of both OAs and debate speeches. I think anyone can learn to give a good OA in the same way in which anyone can learn to give a good prime minister speech. But you need to keep practicing and you need to keep working, both in terms of going to tournaments and practicing at home, be it by watching debates, judging them, delivering OAs, listening to workshops like this, listening to other people's recorded OAs. But if you want to improve, it takes effort. Workshops like this can give you tips and tricks, can give you some sort of direction, but ultimately, this is both good news and bad news. It comes down to you and the amount of effort you put in. Thank you to everyone who chooses to click on this video and watch this video to the end. I really hope it will be helpful to people who are trying to improve in their judging, and I hope I will be seeing many of you at the upcoming Euros and further tournaments. Thank you.